Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Create a Place podcast. Today I'm here with Rita Lowman. She's a friend of mine, I've known her for a lot of years. We're going to talk about that. And she is a 45-year banking veteran who is still currently, although retired, is on the board of Caldwell Trust and Encore Bank. She's also on the board of several other organizations in the community and keeps very active as a speaker and an author and just a mentor in general. She's super passionate about mental health and well-being and mentoring those in leadership and beyond in all of those aspects. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hey, Rita, thank you so much for being here. I'm glad that we get to talk in May, Mental Health Wellness Month, and we've got some great things that I want to talk about. But let's dive in first and talk about our history, because we've known each other for quite a long time.
We have for 20 years.
Yeah.
Actually, prior to being able to know you as well as I do, I actually have been in banking my whole life. And so we were turning banks around, and we'd already been able to turn 2 banks around and sell them. And then all of a sudden, we had someone that wanted to start a bank in Florida, and 5 executives were able to be pulled together to do that. And you were our design and made our buildings just beautiful. We had the most unique buildings, but so much fun doing it too, because we had, the architect, we had both, I think about John and I think about you and myself and all of us working together.
Yes.
So it was a lot of fun during that period of time. And then to see that bank grow, after that, I was able to go into other banks and have just had so much fun. And then all of a sudden, after 45 years, I decided, okay, retirement's here. That's what we did. But we turned 5 banks around during my period of time of those 20 years when I went into community banking.
That is impressive. And I so appreciate that time frame too, because that was a lot of growth and kind of when, when my current partner, Angela, at Create & Co., that was kind of when we got started. And we were partnered, with the architects and, what a great experience. And I remember traveling around a number of months pregnant, traveling to Sarasota and Naples and working on these branches with you. And so that was a lot of fun back in the day.
We had fun trying to put we wanted the round teller counters so that did not look traditional, and they were beautiful, but how y'all made that happen, I don't know. I'm just glad it did.
That was challenging. Yes, it was how can we keep it traditional but make it look modern? And, so it was, and back in the day that was, it was very forward thinking. So we appreciated having the opportunity to do that with you. But talk to me a little bit about what you've been doing the last few years, because and as you've gotten close to retirement, I know retirement is super new to you, but you've also kept very busy. So I would like to talk a little bit about what that transition looked like to you from, being on the go, basically 24/7. You have sat in a lot of very big boardrooms. And as a woman, I commend you for that, because I think that's a very exciting part of your journey, that you have been able to be, a leader in that, not just in banking, but as a woman. And that's really important for, up and coming, women, particularly in banking. But what has this transition been looking like for you?
First of all, let's go back to the boardrooms, because I do have to share just a couple of things. It's true, women were not in the boardroom very often when I was in the boardroom. And I'll never forget one of our chairmen calling me honey in the boardroom. And so it was a difficult conversation, but in his office, I did go in and share with him that in the board, my name is Rita, and I understand where you're from, that honey's a very endearing term. And I know you call your grandchildren and your children by names like that, but I don't hear you calling a man Sonny. So let's do that. Well, the reason I shared that story is because people need to speak up.
Yes.
And they need to share if there's something on their mind. It might not go over extremely well, but again, you need to do what's right in that boardroom. And as long as someone is not treating you equally and listening to your voice, then you're really not doing anything of value in the boardroom.
Yeah.
But from that point, I just wanted to let you know about that, because I always share with people, speak up.
Yes.
It's very important to stand up for what you believe in. Since then, on December the 17th of, 2022, or 2021, actually, I retired. And it was fun. I was president of a bank, and it was one that we sold. My favorite bank was C1. We had that bank here in Florida, and it was all over the state of Florida. And then once we sold it to Bank of the Ozarks,
Mhm.
I went over to Pilot Bank as their president, and we turned that bank around and were able to sell it. But what was so much fun is the people that you meet, the people that you bring with you, and
Yeah.
those that you see growing, Kristina, over the years. And I love the fact that I'll give you an example. Bill Gates, who was the market president for Bank of America, well respected, loved him dearly. Well, it was my pleasure to actually interview and have him on my team at Bank of America. And we look at that and see so many of these young leaders that now have become market presidents and have really truly made a difference in our communities that we live in. And when you can make a difference in someone's life and they can make a difference in your life, then you've really accomplished quite a bit there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, the story about the boardroom. And I think that is very important for people to hear. And, you earned your spot at that table. And, certainly in the rooms that you were in, and you earned that. You weren't given that. That wasn't something that was taken lightly. And I think that that's a really important lesson to understand that, you earn your spot, you have the expertise, in general, people that, have earned their way through and gotten those leadership positions should absolutely feel like they can speak up for themselves, in that time. It is important and to set the tone right away, right? And I know that was probably challenging, especially back in the day, to do that. And so I think that's a really good precedence to set, and I'm glad you shared that.
Your voice is so important. And what ends up happening often is, if you say it the first time and they don't hear it, it's okay to say it again if you really believe in it. Now, again, you may walk out of the room and you're all in agreement with what's going on, but at least you've had great dialogue in that boardroom and
Right.
everyone has shared what they feel should happen or would be best for the organization. So I always encourage, whether it's in a boardroom or just a meeting itself,
Sure.
share what you feel like needs to be shared. And the value that you add is so important.
How was that taken, by the way?
It wasn't taken very good at
No.
all. Different people would take it different ways.
Sure.
But again, for someone to address the chairman of the board, that can be quite difficult. Now, most chairmen that I've worked with in the past would have said, gosh, I never really thought of it that way. But sometimes it doesn't work quite that way.
Sure.
That's okay too. But I had to do it. It was something that was really important to me. I also have another chairman that many people know, and it's in my book, but that's Hugh McCall. And one of the things that Mr. McCall shared with me one time is the biggest regret he'd ever made was not going to his child's World Series Little League game. Now, how often does a child play in a World Series Little League game? And what that brought to my mind, and he shared with me, Rita, make sure you go to those big events for your children. Now, you might not be at every single event, but I always tried to go to the big events that my children were having because, again, they're so important and it means a lot to have that parent there. Well, it's the same when you're talking to your associates. No, and I always share this, faith and family are the first two things. And then, of course, what you're doing for your occupation is very important. But
Yeah.
as long as you put your faith in your family first, then you're going to be successful in whatever you do.
That's really good advice. I think everybody can benefit from that. um, so moving past, past retirement,
Yes.
now after having all these wonderful experiences in leadership and banking, and I mean, you've been on the national level many times and, have been to DC. I mean, you've done so much. What does it look like for you in these last few years as you've been retired? And I know you're not doing nothing. I mean, you are still, very much involved, but I know that that's different, and you talk about how that's probably not thought of very often, right? That the financial pieces are always thought of, or at least you try to as you're moving into retirement. But something you had brought up to me that not everybody thinks about it, from a personal level. What does that mean to you, and how can you prepare for that?
That's so true. I always talk about emotional retirement because, again, financially, most people have been prepared and they're ready to retire.
Sure.
But then you go, okay, I've been the president of a bank or I've been a banking center manager, whatever your career's been. And that's what I've been doing for the last 20, 30, 40 years. And now all of a sudden I'm going to wake up and not be known by that bank.
Right.
In the past, it's Rita Lowman, president of whatever, or whatever my title was with that particular institution. I was known for that institution and that institution was known with me. And then all of a sudden you don't. So I'll take a kind of a pivot from there and share with you two things. First of all, while we were getting ready to sell our last bank, my son passed away. And we went through not only my son passing away, but COVID also. So our whole life was changing. We received a knock on our door February 26th of 2020 that shared with us that Clint had passed away. He lived in South Florida. And so we were really very concerned, and we'll talk a little bit more about mental health as we go forward. My reason for sharing that right now, though, is because I had not only that challenge, because again, that is something so tremendous in your life that never goes away when you lose a child.
No.
Then I also needed to be very concerned about our associates during COVID.
Right.
Because again, COVID was affecting people in different ways. And, many people did not feel that the COVID shot was right for them because of, religious faith beliefs or their family. And so we were having to try and really navigate through that period of time while still keeping a banking center open, all of our banking centers open, and while also navigating the sale of our bank.
Great.
And so it was quite a bit at that period of time. And during that period of time, my husband was able to not really he had retired from Kraft Foods many years ago. He was with them for 35 years. And so he was grieving in a different way than I was. And one of his ways of coping with the grief was he was rebuilding our lake at the farm. And he knew that Clint would love that. So he did that. And I was working a different way. So when retirement came around and I was asked, would I start another bank or would I be president of a bank? All of these different things were being asked of me. As in, right now, I don't know exactly what I want to do. So at that point, I took about the next 4 months and spent a lot of the time at the farm doing the grieving process. And when I say a process, it's ongoing.
Sure.
And as you probably know, anytime you lose someone very close, but especially a child who should never go before their parent, you have to go through the grieving process. And so I went to the farm and said, what do I want my next steps to be in my career? And I realized I did not want to go back and run a bank again. And I did not want to turn another bank around, but I did want to keep my feet wet. And so therefore I had opportunities to actually join a couple of boards. And now I sit on Encore Bank Board of Directors and Caldwell Trust Board of Directors. And I love both of that because I get to do what I enjoy, be able to share my voice. And talking about DC, I still go to DC. I could not let that go out of my system because when you walk the halls and you talk to your congressional leaders about the banking industry and what's important to the banking industry, that means a lot. And I always share with every young person, it doesn't have to be about banking. Whatever you're passionate about and whatever bill is important to you, make sure you go up, whether it be in Tallahassee or DC. I just happen to go to DC, but make sure when you go up that you talk about what that is and continue to work through those bills and let them know why those are important.
Yeah, that's great. Can we back up just a little bit to your grieving process? I agree. Most people just can't even imagine what it's like to lose a child. That is definitely not the way it is supposed to work. But anytime you lose someone that you care about, that is a huge process. And like you said, it's ongoing. So what can you share, in that time that you took for yourself? Is there any advice that you can give, particularly for leadership who feel like they can't stop?
Right.
Can't stop, won't stop, got to keep going, have all these responsibilities. Obviously you probably felt like you had to pour yourself into work, not just to kind of keep yourself going, but also to take care of all the other people that you now were taking care of in all of that, and your associates and everyone that you had to focus on. And is there any advice you have in dealing with that, just a little bit?
Yeah, there's quite a bit, but let me share one thing that I think is really important. My oldest son shared with me, Mom, everybody asks how you and Dad are doing. Nobody asks how I'm doing.
Oh.
And that's so true. So often you're talking to the parents and you don't realize this is a child that's lived with that child for their whole life, for 18 years.
Yeah.
And, they still talk. They were both in China at the same time. And it brought back just this realization to the fact, you're right. We need to take everyone in the family under our wing and realize everyone is grieving in a different way and be able to help that grieving process along those lines. One of the things I also share, and I have this book here, Stronger Than Stigma, that Ian Adair actually wrote, but asked many of us, about 20 executives, to write a chapter about mental health, addiction, and mine was about my son, Clint. And Clint and I had written it together. He had approved it. Prior to the book being published, and you'll see that in here, it actually states that Clint passed away before the book could be published. But he knew that that was being written because we felt it was really important to share his story. And his story was that he kept falling into the same pattern. And all of a sudden, when we finally were able to get him the real help that he needed, and the programs he needed. At the time of this book, he had been clean for 2 years, and he was actually working in the industry. And we felt really good about that. We received so many texts and emails from people, but one of the stories I love is there was a woman that was in her 40s, and she said she'd gone to where he was, and they sent out her counselor, and it was this big, good-looking guy, and that was the age of like her son. She said, "What is he going to do for me?" He hugged her and he said, "We're in this together."
Oh,
And she said that had always meant so much. And about a year later, when she was having some problems, she called him and he was able to talk through with her and listen to the issues. And that's what's so important, is listening to your friends. Don't ask them how they're doing. We're going to tell you we're fine.
yes.
One of the things I always suggest is either how are you doing in the moment, or if there's a time that you need to talk or you would like to talk, I'm always here to listen.
Yeah.
And I've had many parents to call me after I've spoken on panels or different things along those lines and said, "Thank you so much. I would like to talk to you. I had coffee just the other day. I don't drink coffee. It's iced tea for me." Anyway, we went downstairs and they shared some of the things that they needed to talk about. And again, if you're here and you're able to listen, that means a lot to so many people as you continue to move forward in your journey of grief.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. And I think that's important to learn and to know, in the workplace too, as we talk about, leadership and employees and employee experience, and really just being people that are working together all the time. I think that translates to that too, right? Is being able to listen, and it offering a space to do that, right?
It's so important. We have our associates often will be going through different things, even in schools. I'll tell you a story in a moment about one of the schools here, but I could tell sometimes when there was something going on with our team or an associate and ask them if they would like to talk. And one of them shared with me that they lived in two different environments, one with their mom when they were with, and one with their dad. And the mom lived off the grid, the dad really had a very nice home and everything. And it confused that associate. And there was anger within the associate. And so we offered him some, the assistant program that we bring the psychiatrist, or they go to the psychiatrist, or and talk through it.
But offering the tools to get them help.
Exactly.
Yeah.
First we listened, and then I offered the tools. And I will tell you, about a month later, he came in and said, "Oh my goodness, I've been through 2 sessions. Thank you so much." Because again, and he didn't have to tell me that he'd been through 1 session. I don't have to know that they've ever gone through anything.
Right.
Again, and understanding or listening or just seeing their demeanor. Sometimes you can see that something's going on in their life. But I'll go back to, there's one of the schools here, and you may have heard of it. It's Sly Elementary, and the Bullard Academy is part of that, which is a great academy. They actually have a wellness and kind of a well-being area where you can go in and talk to a psychologist anytime if you're having an issue. Well, the principal is very good, doesn't believe in necessarily attention unless it's the right thing. So she took this one young man in and said, "I believe he needs to be able to talk to you because he's always done extremely well. And this last week, it's been really an issue." Well, come to find out that he was having some problems at home. His father had some issues. And to talk that through and to let him know that there's someone there that cares. And that's what we do in the workplace.
Yeah.
It's not just about let's get that bottom line, because you can't get the bottom line if you don't have the associate to help you get there.
Right.
And so the associate has to feel good about what they're doing, when they're doing it, and they also have to feel good about themselves. That's why when you take vacation, I always share with my associates, don't want to hear from you. And a lot of times, even with the executives, I actually put this into place where for 2 weeks, they were cut off from email. And it's really a good thing because you are then devoted to your family, you're devoted to the things that you want to accomplish. And if you really want to know what's going on, you can call, but you don't have to worry about those 50 emails that came in this week.
Interesting. So you actually shut that email off. Wow, that is a powerful move.
Powerful move, but it really is something. And I will tell you, years ago, it was actually something you had to do. Okay, because when you took vacation, the regulators required that you could not have access. Well, then the regulations kind of relaxed, and I put that back into place about 10 years ago. And it worked out well.
That makes a lot of sense. I think it's even more critical now because it's just 24-hour access all the time.
Exactly.
And it's just exhausting for most people, And
It's just amazing to me. And I was bad about this too, but getting that or sending that 2 o'clock email.
Yeah.
Not two, I'm talking about 2 a.m.
Right.
Not that you expect them, but it's on my mind, so I'm going to send it out. But then all of a sudden, if their iPhone should ding, they're going, oh no, should I answer it?
Yeah.
And so I had to make sure that either I timed it so it went out at a normal hour, or that I just put it down as a note and talked about it later.
Oh, that's a good point, because I am famous for sending emails in the middle of the night, just because it's the only time I have to sit and think for a minute and everything else is not coming in. But maybe that's a good idea to schedule when those actually get sent out, even though you've done them.
Right.
So that,
Right.
and then hopefully most people turn their notifications off. But that's a real thing to have to think about and talk about, and making sure that, again, your mental health, is not being on stage,
Right.
being available 24/7, that is exhausting. And we don't have to be, or you feel like you need to be, that it can be a huge relief, if, your leadership is encouraging you to turn that off and not reaching out to you and not, kind of prompting you to do that. And I like the idea of turning off the email altogether. I think most people would probably freak out about that, but it's a really great thing in theory. Well, that's really great advice. So and I know that your retirement looked a little different than most people's, because you were going through, a lot of grief and, the loss. I mean, just the insurmountable loss. What, just from, the retirement, um, itself, how did that look for you? And so what advice can we give to others, that are starting to go through that aren't even thinking about that yet? Got our finances all set, we're ready to go. But what are some things that they should do and think about and try to refocus as they move into that next phase of life?
Absolutely. So a few of the things that I always share with people is, first of all, what are you passionate about? And not work passion, but is there some organization that you're really passionate about? Do you enjoy art? Do you enjoy the museum? And then therefore, if there's something along those lines, then start thinking about, do I want to be a docent, or do I want to actually take art classes? What might I want to do? And get yourself active in that. Also, physically, don't sit and read a book and watch TV all day. You need to be physical.
Yeah.
Because you've been physical for me, for 45 years, or basically all my life. And then all of a sudden, oh, what do I do? So you have to make sure that you're out walking, or you're going down to our gym, doing something along those lines, so that you're keeping yourself really healthy. And then you're going to also find out that you need your brain to continue to work. And if you don't keep your brain active, then it is going to say, oh, I forgot about whatever. And I find a lot of times that I'll sit here and I'll do what I call mind games so that I can keep myself going. I think that's very important. And then what do you want to do with friends? Do you want to travel? Are there things along those lines? So make yourself a list. And I've always liked this, because I've always kept a list of kind of 20 bucket list things that I would like to do.
Yeah.
And make sure that those are things you do now. You have the time, and plan those with your family, your friends. Just take time for yourself, though. Now, I'll say this, whether you're working or you're not, because what ends up happening is, first of all, when you're working, you say, oh, I don't have time to do it. And I was bad about that. But what I did try and do is, every week I would either, treat myself to a massage or treat myself to something and that I enjoyed. And now I do the same thing. I actually schedule out time for me, me time. And I always suggest to people. And the one thing I've really enjoyed since I've retired is reconnecting with people that are retired or that I've not talked to in a while. And just to get their ideas and see what they're doing. Is there anything that they're doing that I might enjoy?
Yeah.
Those lines. And then, of course, as you know, I have a farm. So much of my time is spent at the farm, enjoying the cows and being able to go down and do a little fishing. I'm not really good at it, but still it's fun just to do that. And Gary and I've traveled quite a bit, so that's been fun too.
Well, and I think those are all really important things to think about, and probably one of the biggest things is the identity piece, right? You feel like you had mentioned before, I am Rita Lowman, and here's my credentials. And I think a lot of people, come up against that when and some people are probably just fine. They're like, I'm out of here and this is good. But I think most of us, particularly people that have been in one profession for a long time or have really built, up that career. What do you say about that identity piece? When you're transitioning out of that, and one day I go from, Kristina York, executive of, XYZ. What does that look like when I transition into retirement,
Yeah.
and then you gave some great ideas on what you keep active, but is there a little bit of advice you'd say about, maintaining your identity, but without having it attached to something you thought that was super critical, you thought at one point to who you were?
Right. I always love the fact that, you know, you're so and so's mother, or you're so and so's wife, or you're with the bank, whatever it might be. And now what you end up seeing is you yourself go, it's okay to be just me. It's okay to be Rita Lowman. And even though my name, people do know my name, they are not identifying me. They identify me with the banking industry. I must say that.
That's hard to get away from.
Exactly.
You've been a pieneer, so that's going to be hard to lose.
But they're not going to see me, dressed in purple for one bank or green for another bank, and they're going to, I am a green. But what they're going to see is Rita Lowman who's enjoying life, and that's what I share. It's okay to be you, and think about who you are and what you really want to accomplish in this next chapter, because it is a chapter. It could be a 1-year chapter, it could be 10-year chapter, because a year from now, all of a sudden you may say, you know what? I really want to have my own business. Now, we own a couple of businesses, so we keep ourselves busy in that line too. However, they're not as demanding as what, of course, my husband would disagree with that, but they're not as demanding as when you're running a company like you're doing day in and day out.
Right.
So you have to think about, it's okay. I can identify with, and I'm happy identifying with me. But again, I go back to the emotional part and really thinking through, I'm going to emotionally be okay. And if you're not, therapy is not a bad thing.
No, it's not.
It really isn't. And people sometimes say, oh, I can't do therapy. But no, if you are having a hard time with retirement, or if you're having a hard time in work, it's okay to say, I need some help, and find that help. And then the help can be, truly a therapist or someone you want to talk to. And I talk about this in work too. In work, you have sponsors, you have coaches, you have mentors, and they're all important in some way in your life. Well, in work or outside of work, that person to talk to, being a therapist or a friend, those are very important also.
That is important. And, before we get to retirement too, that I think that's an important lesson to learn, as you're still, very active, and maybe even going back to beginning of your career, right? And you've experienced a lot of that, in leadership. You've been able to mentor countless people, you've been a leader of a lot of teams. And so I think that that's, a really important thing to remember, the therapist, the mentor, the sponsor, is finding that person, that can be that for you, right? What kind of things, pre-retirement, can you share about being a leader? And, not only were you, leading the charge on buying and selling and, reconfiguring, restructuring, massive deals, but you were also in charge of teams, and so, or not in charge of them, but you were leading them, because I know you have been and still are a great leader, because you think about people as a whole.
Right.
And I know this is a big thing for you. And so share a little bit about that, and looking at people, particularly as you're looking at the retirement, but now just looking in general at people, when you're looking at them more as a holistic being, which is what we're trying to have more conversations about now, because I think that's gotten lost over the years. And I think the pandemic, was a catalyst for us to kind of return to that mentality a little bit. We don't have to go to the extreme, emotional side of things, but there is a very good happy medium in taking care of the person that works with you versus just treating them as a human capital, as a human resources.
No, I agree. In fact, many of the banks that we turned around, we took a core team with us, because that core team understood the vision, the values, they had our ethics, and I'm all about ethics. You need to make sure you're doing the right thing for the right reason. And if you're doing that, then you're going to be able to sleep at night. And that's important also, that you feel good about that. But as far as leading, I don't believe you lead from the front or the back. I believe you lead from the side. You're all walking together. And when you're walking together in the same path, then you're going to come with a great solution. And listen to everyone. We've talked about this a little bit earlier, listening to what they have to say. But the other thing is, let them share with you. I believe that feedback is 360. It goes up and down the ladder. And when I would bring my associates in for the monthly, quarterly discussions, and again, my door was always open, but we would not only talk about their strengths and what had really happened during that period of time, but what could I have done differently? And how could I have led them in a different way? Or what do they have on their plate that they want to accomplish? I
Sure.
had several people that, there was one young lady, and hers was all about dollars, which is normal. A lot of people want to make more money.
Sure.
How are you going to get there? What are you going to do to improve your skill set to be able to say that you're at a higher value? And you need to talk through that with people. Also, education is so important.
Yes.
You never stop learning. And in fact, I'm sitting in an educational class next week. I think it's important at any age that you get those skill sets and you really fine tune them and then keep them fine tuned. Banking industry is changing a lot. However, as a director, my job is totally different from when I actually was running the bank. I don't run the bank now. I'm oversight and making sure that the bank is being healthy and that the investments are the right way and that we have the right management team. So sometimes at a board meeting, I have to sit back and go, whoa, no, I'm not running the bank. I'm here in a different capacity. So think about what capacity you're in when you're leading and when you're working with your associates so that you're able to guide them in the way that's going to be best for them.
Yeah, that's a great point, and listening to them again. I mean, I don't think we can stress that more, right? Is the listening piece of it. And it is, it is feedback both ways. I think if you can do that, in a healthy, respectful way, I think that goes really far, in the relationship and in the development of both people.
Well, when you talk about people, one of the things, and you saw this because you helped us so often, but the way that you put those people in their offices or their cubes or whatever makes such a big difference.
Yes.
Because again, if I feel comfortable where I am, I'm going to be productive. And if I can say, okay, this is my space, it's funny because so many people said, oh, we gave up our space during COVID.
Yeah.
And I understand that. But in banking, you can't give up your space.
Yes.
You need to be in a banking zone. You need to be there working. But again, it's important that they have their space and that they can be creative in their own space.
Yes.
It's interesting because a lot of times, and we were very big about this, we did not necessarily like for you to have family pictures there. And it wasn't because we didn't love your family. It's because we did not want you to ever be harmed in any way. And banking is a little bit different along those lines.
Sure. Security.
Yeah, it is. It's all about security. But again, I used to love it when you would come in and you would see one of their children had drawn a picture, or when they would have all of their stars because we gave out star cards.
Oh, yeah.
And they would have their star cards there. So they've really accepted it and they feel a part.
Yes.
You want them to feel a part of that.
Yes, absolutely. And the environment, that they're in could definitely make a big difference in that. And, in an environment, not just physical, but also, like you're saying, to have a safe space, to be who they need to be, and, strive for what their goals, are. And also allowing them, going back to what you said about the education, upskilling, folks, I think is a really big deal too, because, you don't just promote people because they're good at what they do. You promote them, because they could potentially be a good leader. And I think that's a big thing that people struggle with today in particular, because there's just so much growth and change and, trying to kind of figure out what all that looks like. And you promote somebody because they're great at that. But then if you don't upskill them, you don't give them these leadership skills that you're talking about, the listening and the being empathetic and being able to offer, this openness. If you can't do that, then you need to find some way to get those skills,
Right.
and so that you can be a good leader. And I agree, it is walking alongside, those folks. That's really important.
And I share two things with our associates. I always share with them, if you're not enjoying what you're doing 80% of the time, then most likely you're not in the right opportunity. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay that you're not, because again, we want you to enjoy where you are and what you're doing. And the other thing, it's okay to say, I don't understand. I have a favorite word and it's called cause. And we all have a cause to be the best we can possibly be. But each letter, the C is for commitment, and you're committed to your faith, your family. You're committed to the opportunity that's given to you as far as work. The A is your attitude. The day you walk in, you need to have that positive attitude. U is understanding. And if you don't understand what is being asked of you, you need to check it out and make sure, do you need more training? Is there someone that can sit beside you? And that's our responsibility as leaders to help with the understanding.
Speak up.
It is.
Yeah.
And the S is for self-image. You need to look in the mirror and like who's looking back at you. And my favorite is E, is enthusiasm. And the IASM is I am sold on myself. And we want you as an associate to be sold on yourself, to really enjoy what you're doing. And I share that all the time when I'm speaking. No matter what you're doing, if you believe in yourself, then you can accomplish that goal that you've set out for yourself to accomplish.
No, I think that's awesome. I mean, that's really good to think about, all those individual things. And that's where it starts, right? You have to start with, with you and how you portray yourself and what your goals are. And I think that's a great acronym. So I will have to definitely put that in the show notes so we can remember that. Um, Anything else that you would want to share? I know that you now are leaning into a lot more, and you always have, but a lot more now in your retirement years into speaking, into causes and you do, you're on the boards for a couple of different organizations, but is there anything else that you would share about that, about, mental health, anything we need to really think about, or any topics that are coming up in more recent discussions that you've been having that I think would be really important to our listeners?
Yes. Well, first of all, mental health, well-being, addiction are very important to me. And I really started speaking up after Clint passed away. And it was really helpful for many people because of the fact that any family can have that issue,
Yeah.
Kristina. It doesn't matter where you come from. If your family has an issue, it affects the entire family.
Right.
And the entire family needs to work through it together. And so I always share with people, don't be afraid to say, I need help. And I think that's very important along those lines. The other thing that I always talk about, again, I go back to faith. Whatever your faith is, whatever you believe in, you need to make sure that that stays with you and stays with your family, because that faith is something that's going to get you to that next day. And there's times that, at night we go to bed and we don't know if we're going to wake up that next day. That is not a guarantee by any means. Having faith, though, will help you sleep better that night, whether you wake up the next day or not. And I just want my family to always know that, we're all in this together. And I have a very small family. I don't have I have no brothers and sisters. And of course, I have only one child that's remaining, but he is our world. And I've got to get a little quick plug in for him. But
Oh, yes, please.
as you know, he is an attorney for a few years and then decided to go with our State Department. And so now he's the consular chief in Berlin. And I'm so proud of what he's accomplished over the last 15 years with the State Department.
That's amazing.
And yeah, it really makes us proud. But it also brings to reality that everyone is different and what their goals are. And one of the things he shared with us is, Mom, Dad, I've been an attorney for the last 3 years. I don't want the hours that you and Dad put into your careers. And not that he doesn't put long hours into the State Department, but he gets to travel and do things that he really enjoys doing. So I recommend that you listen to your family and your children and your associates. Every associate does not want to be promoted. And so often we think, oh, she would be a great candidate for this, or he'd be a great candidate for that. Have you spoken with the associate?
Yeah.
They may be very happy in doing what they're doing. And then if they are, you just continue to grow them in that opportunity. I had a banking center manager said, I love being a banking center manager. That's great. We love you. Because we all need great ones.
Yeah.
Think about talking to your associates. What do they truly want to do? And your family. Your kids don't all want to go to college. I will tell you that I have one of my cousins, his son is now in welding, doing extremely well. And there's opportunities in so many different fields out there. So don't push your child into something that they do not want to be pushed into, or they may not excel in. And so listening to not only yourself and what your inner voice is saying, but what your family or your associates are saying is very important. And one thing that I always share is one of my favorite quotes is that never go back. If Cinderella had gone back for her slipper, she would not have been a princess. So make sure you always move forward.
Oh, I love that. And that's really important to remember, I think, is not going back, but moving forward. And like you said, moving forward doesn't look the same for every person. And whether you're talking about your family or your associates or your employees or whoever that is, I think that's important to remember because not many people talk about it, and I think the assumption is that everybody wants to grow, everybody wants to, make this certain progress, but you're right, it doesn't look the same for everyone. And it is so critical that leadership teams, directors and when you're working with your employees, to figure out exactly what that is. And, understanding that it might not even be with you anymore, and I had a great conversation recently with an HR consultant who, brought that to light. And I thought, well, that's really something you don't always think about. You're not really diving into that a lot, but the exit strategy, or if the employee is just not happy and maybe it's just not the right role, or maybe it's just not the right company, there is a very respectful and, well done way to do that, and help them move on to what's new for them. And like you said, it's not going back. And it's also not burning those bridges. It's, it's really portraying, that sense of care. And if you care that much while they're there, and you care when you see them off, what that does for you, what that shows to your employees that remain, what that shows to incoming employees, I think is really critical, to think about. And it just goes right along those lines of, understanding and listening to what, they really need, and what's really going to fulfill not only them and make them successful in what they're doing, but what that ultimately does for the company, because that will affect, what the performance is.
It is. And one of the things I always share with my associates, whomever you've worked for, pull out the traits that you enjoy and the traits that you don't, and blend those so that you're not making the same mistakes that one of your managers made with you. And therefore, you can really increase and enhance what you're doing. And if you want to have an opportunity outside of the bank, that's the way I always share it. I will share with someone that I believe that you do need an opportunity. I will never fire anyone. I always say there's an opportunity for you outside of the organization. And that way, you're right. I've had associates that maybe I was with a bank that did not fit their skill set at that time, but the next one may. And I may call them back, which I have done, or they've called me. And it works out, like you said, if you make sure it's a very nice exit. And that a nice way that you've given them that opportunity, or they've shared with you they want another opportunity.
Exactly. Even down to, well, let us help you with your LinkedIn profile, or, some people might think that's going too far, but, it's just some of those niceties, just some of just the human kindness of how we handle some of those situations. And I want to jump back for 2 seconds, because you said enjoying what you do 80% of the time. And I really liked hearing that, because I think that's important to understand. You're not going to love what you do 100% of the time. I think 80 is a good percentage. But I think that was a really good point to make, because, you're going to have that 25%, whatever that looks like, of the things you just don't enjoy. But as long as you have the majority of it that you're enjoying, you make the rest of it just part of what needs to be done. And I think for most professions, that's probably true. So I'm glad you said that, because I think that's something that maybe people can use to measure, what really, how they really feel about their job.
And
right?
80% of the time is basically one day out of the week. But it's not going to be that full day. It may be, okay, I've had a bad morning, so I come in and I'm not enjoying, because I have so much on my desk that I need to get done. So that might be it. But then by the end of the day, my manager's brought me a candy bar and I'm happy.
Everything's
good. What that's going to look like.
No, I appreciate that. Well, this has been a great chat. I want to make sure if there's any last pieces of advice. You've had such a great career, and are still, super involved in the community. And I think that's such a great testament, to who you are. And any last pieces of advice you give as a leader, as a woman, as just a beautiful person in this world that has just given so much back to the community and to your associates over the years.
Well, I appreciate that. I think the biggest compliment that you receive is when somebody shares with you that they've enjoyed being a part of the career that you've had, or that you've made a difference in their life. One of the things I was kidding you about earlier, I was so pleased when Florida Trend named me a living legend, because I'm glad to know that I'm still living. I never thought about myself being a legend, but it was a good along those lines. But no, when I'm walking down the street and someone says, "Oh, Rita, I worked on your team," sometimes I do have to say, "Share with me which bank."
Right. Help me out. Right.
And then when they say it was the greatest opportunity and this is what it's done with me or for me, that is really success in my book for me.
Oh, I love that. Well, we'll just leave it there then. Thank you so much for coming on here with us and having this amazing chat. We'll
enjoyed reconnecting.
Yeah, I have too. And I'll make sure that your information is in the show notes for both books. You also did From the Farm to the Boardroom, which is a great book about leadership lessons. So I will make sure that that information is on there, and that people have a way to connect with you too. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Rita. We're going to put all the information that we talked about in the show notes. Both of her books, you'll know how to find those there, and also how to get in touch with her. And I hope that you like and share with a friend. We'd also love to hear from you. How are you creating places we can truly live, work, and thrive? We'll see you again soon.